Simon, on the Democratic side, no one's bothering to mention it, but there is a human being running against Joe Biden. And that human being, who's a member of Congress, Dean Phillips, so far has 2.8% of the vote. That is 10% of the vote that Nikki Haley has gotten. Nikki Haley is at 28% as of right now, flirting with 30%. And so when you put Joe Biden up against an actual human being in the Democratic Party, that human being can get all of 2.8% versus Donald Trump, who, when he goes against a human being in the Republican primary, loses 30%, and in previous primaries 40%. And the question tonight that we don't know, because there's no exit polls. You know, congratulations, exit poll business. They're doing nothing tonight. So the only question that matters on the Republican side of that primary is how many of those Nikki Haley voters will not vote for Donald Trump in November, and we have no exit polling information to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, as you've mentioned, Lawrence, and we've talked in this show, I mean, one of the most remarkable statistics that we've seen so far in the election is these Haley voters in the three early states' willingness to not just not vote for Trump, but to vote for Biden. I mean, it's a big consequential event. But I will just say that if Trump got 60% in South Carolina and it was a romp and a blowout and is getting in the mid-60s here tonight and it's a big win, then Joe Biden getting 80% is a really big win, a really good night for Joe Biden. And I think that this idea that somehow this uncommitted movement would somehow alter the Democratic Party's trajectory, I think hasn't happened tonight. I mean, remember that, you know, Barack Obama in 2012, when he was running for re-election, the uncommitted got 11% of the vote. It's going to be probably 14, 15 tonight, really not a huge difference. And Obama went on to win the general election against Michigan native Mitt Romney by 9 points. And so I don't think things have really changed tonight in the Democratic Party. I don't think this was a good night for the uncommitted vote. It was a good night for Joe Biden. I will say that once again, and we don't have a lot of polling in Michigan, but the polls that were done in February had Trump above, winning by 50 points or more. He's winning tonight by high 30s, low 40s. So once again, based on public polling, Donald Trump is underperforming the public polls that are available to us, as he's done in the three early states earlier this election cycle.
So what we've seen since 1968, which was one of the first times we ever saw it, when an incumbent president was up for re-election and someone within that party challenged the incumbent president. The worst thing that can happen for the incumbent president is that challenger, that human being, get votes. That's what Lyndon Johnson saw in New Hampshire. Gene McCarthy got 42% of the vote. And Lyndon Johnson dropped out of the presidential race, not because he thought Gene McCarthy could beat him to the nomination. He was sure he would get the nomination at the convention in Chicago, because that's where it was really going to be decided. It wasn't going to be decided by primaries. But the signal Lyndon Johnson got from that New Hampshire vote was, I can't win in November. This is too much weakness within my own party for me to win in November. And that's why he dropped out. When you look at this vote on uncommitted, which is one that I fully respect strategically of the people who want to cast it, to deliver this expression of this is based on a policy that we care about. We think the president is failing us on this one policy and only on this one policy, on no other policy. This is not a vote for a person. They could have put up a candidate. They could have gone to Dean Phillips. Dean Phillips says he wants a ceasefire. He said in December he wants a ceasefire. They refused to vote for Dean Phillips, and they cast a vote that says to the president, we're not with you tonight. That's all that vote says. We are uncommitted tonight. And what I've been hearing from certainly from the politicians who've been leading that movement in Michigan is none of them are saying they won't be with Joe Biden in November against Donald Trump.
Yeah, and we also have to be a little bit careful tonight in not exaggerating the role of a delegate or two here. I mean, I've helped run the delegate operations on the floor of Democratic conventions, and having a delegate or two is, not a significant achievement. I mean, many times during presidential primaries that a cause or a candidate will pick up a few delegates here or there, because there became a question of how much energy should the Biden campaign really put into this to deny the 15%. And they've made a decision that they could handle, there being this kind of opposition of a delegate or two at the Democratic convention, given that there are thousands of delegates, right? And so, I think it's just very important to recognize that, to not exaggerate on our side the significance of what's happened tonight. I mean, I think, obviously, I also just want to say for the record that Joe Biden has been for a ceasefire. He actually negotiated a ceasefire. He actually is trying to negotiate a ceasefire right now. I mean, and if you look at, I just looked at the Economist YouGov poll from last week. Among Democrats, Biden's approval on foreign policy is in the upper 70s. His disapproval is in the low 20s. The party is with him on what he's doing. I mean, you can be for a ceasefire and still be for Joe Biden, backing Joe Biden and what he's doing in the Middle East. This is an important discussion we're having in the family. We're not all together on this, and it's important that we air this out and continue a respectful debate inside the family. It's a tough issue. But I think this notion that there is some kind of huge backlash against Biden on this issue, I think, has been disproven tonight, actually not proven, in my view.
Well, I want to do both. I want to give that movement the strategic respect it deserves, especially including the decision not to put up a candidate, the decision to say, we simply want to deliver this message at the ballot box. We're going to actively go out and vote, and we're going to vote for a blank. We're going to do that as a way of expressing ourselves, which is much, I don't want to say weaker, but it is a softer objection than going out there the way voters went out there for Gene McCarthy in 1968, because those voters were 100% against Lyndon Johnson when they cast that vote. And there was no way in the world they were going to vote for Lyndon Johnson in November.
Right. Or Ted Kennedy in 1980, or some of the Haley voters in this election, right? It's important, the distinction you're drawing here, which is that there isn't an opposition movement of significance inside the Democratic Party. And I think we can have a respectful debate. We don't have to agree on everything as Democrats. That's what a democracy is all about. This is a healthy debate we're having, as long as it stays respectful and we stay on the same team. And I think that, it is, to your point, I take your point, Lawrence, right, that this was a thoughtful and serious way of addressing concerns about the Biden presidency. But I also think that I'm proud of the president tonight. I think this was a very big win for him. And I don't think it really alters the trajectory of the Democratic primary in any way. But we'll see, right? We got a long way to go, elections to come. And I'll be back here with you many, many times in the coming months, digesting what's going on. But I think that I go back to this basic reality of where we are. Since Dobbs in 2022, right, Democrats keep overperforming, Republicans keep struggling, and it's why I'm so optimistic about what's going to happen this fall.
What we were hearing from Biden voters today are concerns about the issues like this specifically, and then stressing Joe Biden's experience and what they call his success in office. And so that the achievement list of the Biden administration is something that we were hearing bits and pieces of it back from voters today.
Yeah. It's absolutely true. And we see the evidence of it throughout my district. The bipartisan infrastructure law at work, replacing lead pipes throughout my district, investing in our airport. And again, policies that the administration has taken to protect women's reproductive freedom. It's on the record. And the contrast could not be clearer, especially in the wake of this Alabama Supreme Court decision surrounding IVF. Deeply personal issue to so many people. And, what happens in Alabama is not going to stay in Alabama. The voters know this. 125 Republicans have co-sponsored a bill recognizing a fetal right to life without an exception to protect a woman's right to make her family whole, a family's right to make their family whole through IVF.
And that's a bill that if it ever got to Joe Biden, he would veto instantaneously. There's no doubt about it. And Republicans in the Senate have also refused to even allow a vote that the Democrats in the Senate wanted to have on protecting in vitro fertilization.
It's true. Senator Tammy Duckworth is expected to try to bring her bill up, protecting the right to build a family, to the Senate floor. Republicans are saying they're going to block it. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the House's counterpart to that bill. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that that bill gets a vote, including bringing it by a discharge petition if we have to. We're going to hold Republicans accountable to this. They're trying to backtrack now. You can hear their tire screeches around the world as they get their talking points memo from the National Republican Party. But as the first woman and mother in history to represent my district, I don't need anybody to give me a memo on how to talk about women's reproductive freedom. This is a deeply personal issue. It belongs with the women and their doctors themselves, and not with these politicians in Washington who can't even understand the basic biological concepts of how this works. It's been painful trying to listen to them, twist themselves into knots about how they can support these bills and also IVF at the same time. Again, we don't have to resort to hyperbole about these things. The facts simply speak for themselves. Republicans have voted against women's rights, trusting women with their own bodies, these critical decisions, time and time again. And women are speaking up, especially even in places like traditionally conservative West Michigan, where I come from, many voters voting for the very first time for pro-choice candidates.
We don't know yet how many uncommitted voters there are in your district tonight voting that way. Surely you know them. Surely you've spoken to them. They've spoken to you. Are any of them or many of them telling you that they won't vote for Joe Biden in November? And what are you telling them?
I'm telling them that the beautiful part of this democracy is that they have this process through which they can register their complaints and their feelings. And I think, that is one thing that we have seen in this process. This is democracy at work. And, I think the numbers will remain to be seen. Obviously, Joe Biden was the decisive winner in the Democratic primary tonight. We are squaring off again for a Trump-Biden rematch. And I think when voters are presented with that stark contrast of Joe Biden's record and Trump's record, Joe Biden's vision for America and Trump's vision for America, that contrast will make sure will just send voters rushing to the polls again for Joe Biden, as they did in 2022, because we've seen the devastating consequences of a Trump presidency, and we know that a second term could be even worse.
Barbara, what's so fascinating about this for me is you get into a thing that I've just been thinking about vaguely and mostly in wonder. How do you get these people to believe this nonsense? Why can't they separate fact from fiction? But you actually get in here and show which wires connect to what.
Yeah, so if you look at history, what Mussolini and Hitler did, the tactics really haven't changed. Maybe the delivery mechanism has changed a little bit with social media, cable television, but the messages are very similar to the ones that we saw Hitler and Mussolini use. Very simple messages, repeatable little slogans like "Stop the Steal." What Hitler wrote about in Mein Kampf, "Make the lie big." Everybody tells little lies, but would not have the audacity to tell a lie about something so significant. And so the fact that the lie that Trump has told about a stolen election is so big that, ironically, it becomes more believable. So those tactics have been documented throughout history. The
reason why I always thought we could just assume away that part of history is that those dictators all controlled their news media. There was no other voice in Russia than Stalin, in the Soviet Union, or in Germany than Hitler. But what we have here, what's happened is the voter has selected, in a way, to shut off all other information source and take the Fox propaganda and all the right wing and the Trump propaganda.
Yeah, we have now sorted ourselves into news bubbles. where we listen to one side of information or another on social media. You know, you heard that woman say, all my friends voted for Donald Trump. I'm sure she is in a Facebook group with a group of people, and perhaps she watches Fox News. So all she ever hears is the repeat of these ideas of a rigged election and that the investigations against Donald Trump are voter interference. And so she lives in that ecosphere. So in some ways, you're raising a good point that it replicates some of those controlled medias of prior decades.
How do you penetrate it?
Yeah, I think a couple of ways. One is we have to get people out of their basements and off the internet and into the real world. We need to be engaging with people on a human scale and not just talking at each other online. Online people are horrible. We are horrible to each other. We hide behind false personas or even just the nastiness that can be there when you're not seeing a human being face to face. So I think we have to see people face to face. I also think we have to understand that when someone has been duped, the last thing they want to hear is how foolish they have been. When I was a prosecutor, we often dealt with crime victims, people who were the victims of fraud, and they felt shame in having fallen for these things. So I think we have to show people grace. We have to ask them what is the evidence that they are citing and pointing to reach their conclusions, and try to help them see that evidence is necessary for us to reach conclusions. But I think we have to do it with grace and not with dunking on people by telling them, I told you so.
Michigan is one of the great places to study this, since there's been, those people who tried to kidnap and murder their governor. There's been this outburst of the most fanatical kind of behavior at the extreme end of what this book is about.
Yeah, and one of the points I make in the book is that how disinformation is creating dangers to public safety and the rule of law. And so when people are out there ginning up false claims, people become very angry. Why is this happening? Why isn't our law enforcement doing something about this? And so they become inclined to take the law into their own hands, which is what we saw with the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer and make a citizen's arrest, or what we saw on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. People didn't like what they heard, and they thought it was so unjust that they were going to take the law into their own hands. And that's when things become chaotic and incredibly dangerous.
Having studied this more closely than the rest of us have, where are you in the hope versus hopelessness curve?
Yeah, I worry that it's going to get worse before it gets better, but I do think there's hope. I think there are a couple things that we need to do. One is we need to change some laws and have more regulation in social media. We've allowed these giants to grow up, and in many ways they've created wonderful, innovative products, but without any regulation, they will defeat us with artificial intelligence and all the other things, and there are some modest proposals there for regulation. But I also think that we need to persuade people about the importance of truth. I think some people have been duped by the lies that have been fed to them in recent years, but I think there are many other people who are willing to go along with the con because they are choosing tribe over truth. And so they want to align themselves with a particular party, and it doesn't matter to them what the facts are. Donald Trump could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters. And I think he's right, and we need to care again that if we're going to have a democracy, then facts matter.
How much of it is Donald Trump? When Donald Trump goes away, which is either next year or 4 years from now, does this stuff start to deflate?
I don't know, but he certainly was the disruptor who caused it. But we now see a lot of people who have watched and learned his tactics. I worry that the next one who comes along could be even better at it. But we see people like Jim Jordan in Congress, who is leading investigations into the weaponization of government, which is, of course, just turning investigations on their head. We have seen members of the Republican Party try to impeach Joe Biden based on not just lack of information, but false information. And so I worry that now that this tactic is in their hands, that we can see other people try to wield it.
Barbara McQuade, great to have you here on Michigan's Big Night. Thanks very much for joining us. Barbara's book is called Attack from Within, right here. It is available right now.